The mahogany gavel hit the table 3 times, and I watched my son's face drain of color as the judge read my name aloud. 47 years I'd let them believe I was just their quiet mother who baked cookies and mended torn sleeves. 47 years I'd hidden what I really was. But when Garrett tried to steal my house, the house my grandfather built with his own hands, he forced me to remember who I used to be. The photographer who had pushed me out of our family portrait last Christmas was now bowing so low I could see the bald spot he tried to hide. "Mrs. Blackwood," he whispered. "I had no idea. Please forgive me. My name is Evelyn Blackwood, and I'm 73 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened last year, but it feels like yesterday. It's about the day I discovered that the family I'd sacrificed everything for had been planning to throw me away like yesterday's newspaper. And it's about the moment I remembered that before I became anybody's mother, wife, or grandmother, I was someone else entirely." The call came at 6 in the morning, while I was brewing my first cup of coffee in the kitchen that still smelled faintly of the cinnamon rolls I'd baked for Garrett's visit the day before. My hands were steady as I answered. They always were in those days, steady from decades of making breakfast, packing lunches, bandaging scraped knees. "Mom." Garrett's voice was different, clipped, business. "We need to talk." "Well, good morning to you too, sweetheart." I set my coffee mug down on the butcher block counter my late husband Dale had installed 30 years ago. "Is everything all right? Did something happen to little Sage or Phoenix?" "The kids are fine. This is about your situation." "My situation." The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. I pulled my terry cloth robe tighter around my shoulders, suddenly aware of how the morning light streaming through my lace curtains made everything look fragile. What situation would that be? "Mom, you're 73. You live alone in a house that's way too big for you. The property taxes alone are eating you alive, and we both know Dad didn't leave you much." I pressed my lips together. Dale had left me plenty, just not in the way Garrett understood. But I'd never corrected my children's assumptions about our finances. It had seemed easier, somehow, to let them think their father was just a simple electrician who'd worked hard and saved modest amounts. "The house is paid off, Garrett. Has been for 20 years. That's not the point. The maintenance, the utilities, the insurance. Mom, you're barely getting by on Dad's pension and Social Security." This wasn't true, but I'd taught my children that pride was a luxury we couldn't afford. I'd clipped coupons, shopped sales, darned socks until they were more thread than original fabric. Not because I had to, but because I believed it built character. Because my own mother had done the same during the Depression, even after my grandfather's shipbuilding business made us wealthy beyond anything she'd dreamed. I'm managing just fine. Are you? When's the last time you went to the doctor? When's the last time you bought yourself something new? I looked down at my hands wrapped around the coffee mug. The wedding ring Dale had bought me was loose now. I'd lost weight this past year, though I wasn't sure why. My nightgown was soft from countless washings, comfortable in the way that only well-worn things can be. I have everything I need. Mom, listen. Harmony and I have been talking. Of course they had. My daughter-in-law with her yoga retreats and her cleanse diets and her habit of speaking to me like I was a child who couldn't understand big concepts. And we think it's time to consider your options. There's a lovely assisted living place called Sunset Gardens about 20 minutes from our house. You'd have your own apartment, but there'd be people around, activities, medical care on site. The coffee had gone lukewarm in my hands. Assisted living. It's not what you're thinking. It's very nice. They have a library, and you know how you love to read. 3 meals a day, housekeeping included. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. And my house? There was a pause. In that pause, I heard everything I needed to know. Well, obviously you'd need to sell it to cover the costs. But Mom, the market's good right now. Really good. Brookstone Development has been buying up properties in your neighborhood. They're paying well above market value for the bigger lots. Brookstone Development. I knew that name, though Garrett didn't know I knew it. They built those sprawling suburban developments with names like Whisper Creek and Autumn Ridge. Houses that all looked the same, where the trees were saplings and the lawns were perfect green squares. You've already talked to them. We just made some preliminary inquiries to see what your options might be. My grandfather had built this house in 1924, 2 years after he'd married my grandmother. He'd drawn the plans himself, hired the best craftsmen in the state, used lumber from trees that had stood for centuries. The crown molding in the dining room was carved by hand. The hardwood floors were heart pine, so dense they'd barely shown wear after nearly 100 years. The foundation was solid granite, cut from the same quarry that had supplied stone for the state capitol building. How much did they offer? Mom, let's not get ahead of ourselves. How much, Garrett? $800,000. I closed my eyes. The insurance appraisal I'd had done last year valued the house at $1.4 million, and that was before the recent surge in property values. But my children had no way of knowing that. They saw an old house that needed constant repair, not a piece of history that appreciative buyers would treasure. And you think this is what's best for me. I think it's what's safe for you. Mom, what if you fall? What if something happens and no one finds you for days? You don't even have a cell phone. This was true. I'd resisted getting one, partly because the technology seemed unnecessarily complicated, and partly because I treasured the silence in my house. The way I could sit on my front porch in the evenings and hear nothing but crickets and the distant sound of children playing. I want you to think about it, Garrett continued. Really think about it. Maybe come look at Sunset Gardens with us this weekend, just to see. This weekend. Saturday afternoon. We could make a day of it, grab lunch afterward. I opened my eyes and looked around my kitchen, at the ceramic canisters Dale had given me for our 25th anniversary, at the window herb garden where I grew basil and thyme and rosemary, at the old wooden table where I'd helped my children with homework, where Dale and I had played countless games of Scrabble during the long winter evenings. All A. Right? I heard myself say. I'll think about it. Great. I'll call you tomorrow night, and we can nail down the details. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the house wake up around me, the old furnace clicking on, the refrigerator humming, the grandfather clock in the hallway chiming 7 times. I thought about the last time I'd seen Garrett and Harmony at Christmas dinner 6 months ago, how they'd hired a photographer to take family portraits, wanting everything to look perfect for their holiday cards. How the young man had positioned us all in my living room, moving people around like furniture until he was satisfied with the composition. And how, when it came time for the final shot, the one they'd actually use, Harmony had stepped forward. You know what? This might look better with just the immediate family. Garrett and me and the kids. The photographer had nodded agreeably, and I'd stepped aside without protest. I'd watched from the doorway as they posed together on my sofa, my grandchildren's faces bright with excitement. My own reflection had been visible in the glass of the picture window behind them, but none of them had noticed. Now, sitting in my kitchen with the morning light growing stronger, I realized that moment had been a rehearsal. They'd been practicing for this, learning how to erase me from the picture entirely. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that before I became the woman who stepped aside, who deferred, who made herself small for the comfort of others, I had been someone else, someone who didn't step aside for anyone. The question was, could I remember how to be her again? I spent the morning doing what I always did when I needed to think. I cleaned. Not the perfunctory tidying that kept the house presentable, but the kind of deep cleaning that let my hands work while my mind wandered. I started with the guest bedroom upstairs, the one where my grandchildren slept, when they visited, though those visits had become less frequent over the years. As I stripped the bed linens, I noticed something that made me pause. On the nightstand was a water ring, a perfect circle where someone had set down a glass without using a coaster. Sage was only 8, too young to drink anything but juice or milk before bed. Phoenix was 12, old enough to know better but still forgetful about such things. But this wasn't a child-sized ring. It was larger, the kind a coffee mug would make. I ran my finger along the mark, feeling the slight depression in the wood. When had Garrett been up here? During his visit yesterday, he'd claimed he was just dropping off some paperwork I'd supposedly requested. Tax forms, he'd said, though I'd never asked for any such thing. He'd been upstairs for nearly 10 minutes while I'd waited in the kitchen, assuming he was using the bathroom. The paperwork. I'd forgotten about it entirely after his phone call this morning. I found the manila envelope on my kitchen counter, tucked behind the sugar bowl where I apparently hadn't noticed it. Inside were documents from his insurance company, not tax forms at all. Life insurance policies, health insurance summaries, and something called a long-term care assessment. Everything was flagged with yellow sticky notes where I was supposed to sign. I spread the papers across my kitchen table and read them carefully. The long-term care assessment was particularly thorough. It outlined my current living situation and made recommendations for age-appropriate housing transitions. There were boxes checked indicating I lived alone, had no regular medical supervision, and was at risk for falls and other incidents common to elderly residents in oversized homes. At the bottom, in Garrett's neat handwriting, someone had already filled in an estimated date for residential transition, September 1st, 3 months from now. I stared at that date until the numbers blurred. They weren't asking me to consider assisted living. They were telling me it was going to happen. The phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. I almost didn't answer. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Blackwood, this is Sandra Chen from Brookstone Development. I understand your family has been in touch with us about your property. My grip tightened on the receiver. I see. I wanted to call personally to discuss the opportunity. We're prepared to make a very competitive offer, and we can close quickly if that's what works best for your family's timeline, not mine. What timeline would that be? Well, your son mentioned you'd be transitioning to a care facility in early September, so we were thinking a July closing would give you time to sort through your belongings and make arrangements. July, 6 weeks away. I think there's been some confusion, I said carefully. I haven't made any decisions about selling. There was a brief pause. Oh, I apologize. Your son gave me the impression this was already decided. He said you'd had some health concerns and that the family felt it was time for you to downsize. Health concerns. I'd had a physical 3 months ago and had received a clean bill of health. Dr. Martinez had actually commented on how strong I was for my age, how clear my mind remained. I'm afraid my son was premature in his discussions with you. Of course, I understand. These decisions take time. But Mrs. Blackwood, I do want you to know that we're serious buyers. We've been looking for a property like yours for months. The lot size, the mature trees, the proximity to downtown, it's exactly what we need for our next development. I thought about my grandfather's hands shaping the crown molding in my dining room, about my grandmother's rose garden, now a tangle of heritage varieties that bloomed in colors you couldn't buy at garden centers anymore. What kind of development? Executive townhomes, very upscale. The Meadowbrook Collection, we're calling it. 12 units, each with private garage space and modern amenities. We're targeting young professionals who want the convenience of new construction with the charm of an established neighborhood. 12 units, where my house now stood. 12 families crammed onto the acre and a half my grandfather had cleared with his own hands. I'll need to think about it. Absolutely. Take all the time you need. Though I should mention, we do have backup properties we're considering, so if you're interested, sooner would be better than later. After she hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the papers Garrett had brought. Everything was so neatly organized, so carefully planned. The insurance forms that would make me seem more vulnerable than I was. The care assessment that painted my independence as dangerous negligence. The development company that was already making plans for my property. This wasn't a family intervention born of love and concern. This was a business transaction. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Under the quilts my grandmother had made, under the christening gowns my children had worn, under the letters Dale had written me during his stint in the army, I found what I was looking for. A small wooden box, carved with roses, that I hadn't opened in 20 years. Inside were my old business cards. Evelyn Blackwood, they read. Attorney at law, corporate defense. The paper was yellowed now, but the embossed lettering was still crisp. Below the cards was my law school class ring, the one I'd stopped wearing when Dale and I married because it seemed too flashy for an electrician's wife. Below that was a photograph. Me at 35, standing in front of the state courthouse, shaking hands with the governor after winning a case that had made the front page of 3 newspapers. I'd been sharp then. Ruthless, some had called me. I'd specialized in corporate defense, protecting companies from lawsuits that could destroy them. I'd been particularly good at finding the weak spots in opposing arguments, the small inconsistencies that could unravel an entire case. I'd retired when Garrett was born, telling myself it was temporary, just until the children were older. But Dale had been so proud of being the provider, so happy to come home each night to dinner on the table, and a wife who could focus entirely on their family. And I'd been happy, too, for a while. Happy to be needed in that simple, uncomplicated way. But I'd never let my law license lapse. Every 2 years, I'd quietly completed the continuing education requirements, paid the renewal fees, just in case, I'd told myself, just in case I ever needed to remember who I used to be. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It was loose now, my hands had grown thin, but it still fit. I walked back downstairs and called Garrett's office. Blackwood. Construction, answered a voice I recognized as Harmony's. She'd taken over the phones when Garrett's business had grown too big for him to handle alone. This is Evelyn. I need to speak with Garrett. Oh, hi, Mom. He's with a client right now. Can I have him call you back? Tell him I've reviewed the papers he brought yesterday. Tell him we need to talk. Sure thing. Is everything okay? You sound a little... Tell him I'll be expecting his call within the hour. I hung up before she could respond. Then I did something I hadn't done in 47 years. I called my old law firm, Morrison, Wells & Associates. This is Evelyn Blackwood. I need to speak with Jonathan Morrison. I'm sorry, but Mr. Morrison is... Oh, wait. The Evelyn Blackwood? Yes. Oh my God. Hold on just one moment. The phone was answered so quickly I could tell Jonathan had dropped whatever he'd been doing. Evelyn? Jesus Christ, where have you been? I heard you retired, but then you just disappeared. I got married, had children. You know how it is. I know how it's supposed to be. But Evie, you were the best corporate defense attorney in the state. You don't just vanish from something like that. Well, I'm not vanished anymore. There was a pause. Are you coming back? I don't know yet, but I might need some advice. Confidentially. Of course. Anything. What's going on? Someone's trying to steal my house. Jonathan laughed, but not because he thought it was funny. It was the laugh of someone who just realized his old colleague hadn't called for a social chat. Then they picked the wrong woman to steal from. Jonathan agreed to meet me the next morning at a coffee shop downtown, somewhere we wouldn't be seen by anyone who might know my family. I chose a corner table where I could watch the door, a habit from my litigation days that apparently hadn't faded despite decades of disuse. He looked older, of course, grayer around the temples, lines around his eyes, that spoke of 47 years of courtroom battles. But his handshake was still firm, and his smile still held that predatory gleam that had made him legendary among corporate attorneys. You look exactly the same, he lied, settling into the chair across from me. You always were a terrible liar, Jonathan. It's why you stuck to corporate law instead of criminal defense. He laughed, and for a moment I was 35 again, sharp-suited and sharper-minded, feared by opposing counsel and respected by judges who knew better than to underestimate me. Tell me about this house situation. I spread the documents across the small table, the insurance papers, the care assessment, the timeline Garrett had written in his own hand. Jonathan put on reading glasses and studied each page with the methodical attention that had made him successful. This is sophisticated, he said finally. Whoever planned this knows exactly what they're doing. My son's not that clever. Maybe not, but someone is. He tapped the care assessment. This isn't something you fill out at home. This is professional. The kind of evaluation assisted living facilities require before admission. Someone paid a certified geriatric specialist to write this up. My stomach tightened. Without examining me. Oh, they examined you. Look at the date, May 15th. That's 3 weeks ago. Where were you on May 15th? I thought back. Garrett took me to lunch, said he wanted to spend more time together now that his business was doing so well. Where did you go? Some new place downtown, upscale. He said they had excellent salmon. I paused, remembering. He insisted I order the salmon, actually. Said I looked like I'd lost weight, that I needed more protein. How long were you there? Nearly 2 hours. We had to wait for a table, then the service was slow. I stopped, seeing Jonathan's expression. It wasn't slow, was it? Probably not. 2 hours is plenty of time for someone to observe you, take notes, maybe even photographs. Did anyone approach your table? A server who seemed overly attentive, maybe someone claiming to know Garrett? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember. There was a woman, middle-aged, professional-looking. She came over to say hello to Garrett, said she recognized him from some community business group. They talked for several minutes while I just sat there. Did she ask you any questions? A few. Normal, small talk, I thought. How was I enjoying retirement? Was I keeping busy? Did I have any health concerns? The memory sharpened. She commented on my hands, said I had beautiful rings, asked if they were family heirlooms. She was checking for tremors, cognitive function, fine motor skills. This woman wasn't a friend of Garrett's, she was a professional evaluator. The coffee in my cup had gone cold, but I took a sip anyway, needing something to do with my hands. How much would something like this cost? For a comprehensive assessment and documentation package? $5,000, maybe $6,000. I thought about Garrett's construction business, how he'd struggled for years before finally finding his footing. $6,000 wasn't pocket change for him, not something he'd spend on a whim. Someone else is paying for this. That would be my guess. The question is who and why now. I told him about the phone call from Brookstone Development, about their timeline that perfectly matched Garrett's plans. Jonathan made notes on a legal pad, asking occasional questions that reminded me why he'd been such a formidable attorney. I need to see the property records, he said finally. And I want to know more about this development company. Can you give me a few days? How many days do I have? Based on this timeline? Not many. If they're planning a July closing, they'll need to move fast. Probably file for conservatorship within the next 2 weeks. The word hit me like cold water. Conservatorship? It's the only way to force a sale against your wishes. They'll petition the court, claiming you're no longer competent to manage your own affairs. They'll present this assessment as evidence, maybe add testimony from family members about incidents of confusion or poor judgment. What incidents? I haven't had any incidents. You will, or rather, you'll be claimed to have had them. A neighbor who saw you wandering in your yard at night in your nightgown, except you were actually just checking on your roses. A bill you supposedly forgot to pay, when actually it was lost in the mail. Small things, but they add up to a pattern when presented correctly. I felt something cold and familiar settling in my chest, the same feeling I'd had in court when I'd realized opposing counsel was playing dirty. It was anger, but it was also clarity. What do I need to do? First, get your own medical evaluation, real one, from a doctor who doesn't know your family. I can recommend someone, Dr. Patricia Vance. She specializes in geriatric assessments, but she's not for sale. Then we document everything about your current situation, your finances, your health, your daily activities. We build a case that shows you're not only competent, but thriving. And then we find out who's really behind this and we destroy them. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through my financial records. All of them. The safe deposit box Dale and I had kept at First National Bank contained documents I'd almost forgotten about. Stock certificates from investments I'd made during my attorney years. Bonds that had matured and rolled over automatically. Real estate holdings in 3 states that I'd purchased and forgotten about when the children were small. By evening, I had a number that made me sit down hard in my desk chair. I wasn't just comfortable. I was wealthy. Genuinely, substantially wealthy. The pension and Social Security I'd been living on represented less than 10% of my actual annual income. The rest had been accumulating for decades, managed by a financial advisor I met with once a year and otherwise ignored. Dale had known, of course. But he'd also understood my need to live simply, to maintain the fiction that we were just an ordinary middle-class family. It had been a game between us, in a way, seeing how little we could spend while our investments grew quietly in the background. But my children had never known. They'd seen the coupon clipping, the careful budgeting, the second-hand shopping, and assumed it was necessity rather than choice. I called Jonathan from my kitchen phone, the old rotary model Dale had refused to replace because he said it had character. "I need to amend what I told you about my finances." "How so?" I gave him the number. There was a long silence. "Jesus, Evelyn, with that kind of money, why are you living like a poor old woman?" "Because I wanted my children to understand the value of things. I wanted them to work for what they had, to appreciate what they earned." "Well, congratulations, you raised a son who's trying to steal your house." That stung because it was true, but it also clarified something that had been bothering me since Garrett's phone call. "He doesn't know about the money." "You're sure?" "Positive. If he knew I had this kind of wealth, he wouldn't be pushing me into some middle-tier assisted living facility. He'd be suggesting I buy a luxury retirement community, maybe hire private nurses." "Then what's his angle? Why go to all this trouble for a house that's worth what, $1.5 million? I thought about the water ring on my guest room nightstand, about Garrett spending 10 minutes upstairs during his visit. Because someone told him it was worth more than that. A lot more. The next morning, I walked my property with fresh eyes. The 1.5 acres my grandfather had chosen sat on a gentle rise overlooking the valley where the city had grown up around it. From my front porch, you could see the downtown skyline. From my back garden, you could see the river that had made this valley valuable to settlers more than a century ago. But what made the property truly valuable wasn't the view. It was the location, 3 blocks from the new light rail station, 2 miles from the university. Walking distance to the revitalized downtown district that had become a destination for young professionals and empty nesters with money to spend. This wasn't just prime real estate. This was irreplaceable real estate. Brookstone Development wasn't offering $800,000 for my house. They were offering $800,000 for the right to tear down my house and build something that would sell for 3 or 4 times that amount. The question was, how had Garrett figured this out? And who had convinced him that the only way to cash in was to have me declared incompetent? I was still puzzling over this when I heard a car in my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched a black SUV park behind my old Honda. The woman who got out was tall, expensively dressed, and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. I recognized her immediately. She was the woman from the restaurant, the one who'd approached our table and asked all those seemingly innocent questions. She was coming to my front door, and she was carrying a briefcase. I smiled for the first time in 2 days. After 47 years of being careful, of being modest, of stepping aside for other people's comfort, someone had just made the mistake of underestimating me. They had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. I didn't answer the door right away. Instead, I watched through my lace curtains as the woman checked her phone, adjusted her blazer, and practiced what looked like a sympathetic smile. Professional preparation. This wasn't a social call. This was a performance. When I finally opened the door, I made sure to look exactly like what she expected. A confused elderly woman in a faded house dress, blinking in the morning sunlight. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Dr. Rebecca Sterling. I believe we met briefly when you were having lunch with your son." Her voice was warm, practiced. The kind of tone you'd use with someone you thought might not understand complex ideas. "Oh yes, I remember. You're Garrett's friend. Actually, I'm here in a professional capacity today. May I come in? I'd like to discuss some options that might be helpful for your situation." I hesitated just long enough to seem uncertain, then stepped aside. "Of course, dear. Would you like some coffee?" "That's very kind, but I won't take up much of your time." I led her to my living room, the same room where they'd taken that family photograph without me. She settled into Dale's old recliner without being invited, already making herself at home. "Mrs. Blackwood, your family is concerned about you." "Are they?" I folded my hands in my lap, kept my voice small and worried. "Garrett did call yesterday. Something about a care facility, Sunset Gardens. It's a lovely place, but before any decisions are made, there are some legal matters we should discuss." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "As you age, it becomes important to have proper protections in place." She spread papers across my coffee table with practiced efficiency. Everything was flagged with yellow sticky notes showing where I should sign. "This is all very confusing," I said, leaning forward to peer at the documents. "What exactly are these for?" "Well, this first set gives your son authority to make healthcare decisions if you're ever unable to make them yourself. And this one allows him to manage your financial affairs, paying bills, handling investments." I picked up one of the papers, holding it at arm's length. It was a comprehensive power of attorney that would give Garrett complete control over every aspect of my life. It says here that these powers take effect immediately. Shouldn't they only activate if something happens to me? Dr. Sterling's smile flickered. "The immediate activation is really just a convenience. It allows your son to help you with day-to-day tasks. You maintain full control." Of course I didn't. Once signed, Garrett could legally act on my behalf in any financial matter without my consent. "I'm not sure I understand all this legal language." "That's perfectly normal. But Mrs. Blackwood, I have to be honest. Your family is worried about some changes they've noticed. Small things, but concerning." Here it comes, I thought. "What kind of changes?" "Well, your son mentioned that you've been forgetting to pay bills. And your daughter-in-law said you seemed confused during their last visit." Lies, both of them. My bills were paid automatically, and I hadn't been confused about anything during Christmas, unless you counted my confusion about why they'd asked me to. Step out of the family photograph. "I don't remember being confused," I said carefully. "That's often how it begins, Mrs. Blackwood. The memory issues are subtle at first, but left unchecked, they can become dangerous. What if you forgot to turn off the stove? What if you got lost driving?" She leaned forward, her expression full of practiced compassion. "The truth is, living alone at your age is risky. Every day you delay making arrangements is another day something terrible could happen." I let my hands shake slightly as I set the papers back down. "This is all happening so fast. Maybe I should call my own lawyer." "Of course you could do that. But lawyers are expensive, and frankly, they often complicate situations that are really quite straightforward. Your family loves you and wants what's best for you. Isn't that enough?" The perfect blend of authority and sympathy, designed to make an elderly woman feel foolish for questioning her family's judgment. I suppose. Excellent. Now, there is one time-sensitive matter we should address. Your house. And there it was. Your son is concerned about the financial burden it represents. The property taxes alone are substantial, and maintenance costs will only increase. Brookstone Development has made a generous offer that would solve all these problems. $800,000 does seem like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. More than enough to cover your care costs at Sunset Gardens for many years. And with your son managing your finances, you won't have to worry about any details. I nodded slowly, as if considering this. When would all of this happen? Ideally, we'd like the legal documents signed today. The house sale could close within 30 days, and Sunset Gardens has an opening July 15th. It would all work out perfectly. For whom, I wondered. "Dr. Sterling, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How much is Brookstone Development paying you?" The question hung in the air. Her practiced smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind her eyes. "I'm sorry? You're not really a doctor, are you? You might have some kind of degree, but you're not here out of concern for my welfare. You're here because someone is paying you to get these papers signed." "Mrs. Blackwood, I think you might be confused." "No, I don't think I am." I stood up, and when I did, something in my posture changed. My voice lost the quaver I'd been affecting. "I think you're the one who's confused. You see, I know exactly what you're trying to do. The question is whether you know who you're trying to do it to." She blinked, suddenly uncertain. "I'm not sure what you mean." My name is Evelyn Blackwood. I'm 73 years old, I have a law degree from State University, and I spent 15 years practicing corporate defense before I retired. I specialized in protecting companies from people exactly like you. I walked to my bookshelf and pulled out a photo from my attorney days. Me, shaking hands with the governor after a high-profile victory. I set it on the coffee table next to her fraudulent documents. I haven't practiced law in nearly 50 years, but I never let my license lapse. And Dr. Sterling, or whatever your real name is, you have just attempted to defraud a practicing attorney in her own home. The color drained from her face. Mrs. Blackwood, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, all right. You understood me to be a helpless old woman who could be manipulated into signing away her rights. But what you failed to understand is that I built my career destroying people who thought they were smarter than me. She started gathering her papers, hands moving quickly. Perhaps we should reschedule. Sit down. The command in my voice was unmistakable. She sat. Now, you're going to tell me exactly who hired you, how much they're paying you, and what the real timeline is for this scheme. I can't discuss client. Client confidentiality doesn't apply to criminal conspiracies. And what you've just attempted is elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. Those are felonies. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You have a choice. You can tell me what I want to know, or you can explain yourself to the district attorney's office. I still have friends there, and they take elder abuse very seriously. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, it wasn't supposed to be like this. How was it supposed to be? Simple. You were supposed to be a typical elderly widow, isolated, financially vulnerable, grateful for family support. But I'm not typical. No, you're not. She looked down at her hands. Mrs. Blackwood, your son isn't the mastermind. He's being manipulated too. That stopped me cold. What do you mean? Someone approached him 6 months ago, told him your property was worth more than he realized, but that you'd never agree to sell unless you believed you had no choice. Who approached him? She hesitated, then pulled out a business card. Victoria Hartwell. She runs an estate planning service. She told your son she could help protect your assets, but that timing was critical because of pending zoning changes. I looked at the card. Victoria Hartwell, Senior Estate Strategist. And what does Ms. Hartwell get out of this? Brookstone pays her a finder's fee, 30% of the purchase price, nearly $250,000 for convincing my son to betray me. Dr. Sterling, you're going to leave now. You're going to tell Victoria Hartwell that I'm not signing anything, and you're going to strongly suggest she find a new line of work. After she left, I sat in my living room looking at the business card. Victoria Hartwell. I'd heard that name before. Then I remembered. I walked to the kitchen and pulled out the phone book, looking up Hartwell. There were 3 listings, but only one that made my heart race. James Hartwell. The same address as Victoria's business. 25 years ago, James Hartwell had been opposing counsel in the biggest case of my career. I'd found the flaw in his case, a tiny inconsistency that unraveled his entire argument. I'd humiliated him in open court. 2 months later, he'd suffered a heart attack and never practiced again. Victoria wasn't just targeting elderly people for money. She was targeting me for revenge. I spent that evening building a case. By midnight, I had 3 legal pads filled with notes, a timeline stretching back 6 months, and a clear picture of exactly how Victoria Hartwell had orchestrated my son's betrayal. I called Jonathan at 7 in the morning. Please tell me you have good news, he said instead of hello. Better than good. I know who's behind this, and I know why. Can you meet me at the courthouse at 9? The courthouse? Evie, what are you planning? What I should have done 47 years ago. I'm going back to work. 2 hours later, I walked up the courthouse steps for the first time since I'd retired. I wore my best navy suit, my hair pulled back in the same severe chignon I'd worn in court decades ago. On my right hand, my law school ring caught the morning light. Jonathan was waiting in the lobby, and his expression when he saw me was worth everything I'd been through. Jesus Christ, Evie, you look like you could argue before the Supreme Court. I look like someone who's tired of being underestimated. District Attorney Morrison was younger than I'd expected, probably in his 40s, but his handshake was firm and his eyes were sharp. Ms. Blackwood, this is an honor. I studied your work in law school. The Hartwell case is still taught as a master class in evidence analysis. Thank you. But I'm not here about the past. I'm here about elder fraud. I laid out the entire scheme, the fraudulent assessment, the forged timeline, Victoria Hartwell's finder's fee arrangement. I presented it like the opening argument it was. Clear, logical, devastating. When I finished, Morrison leaned back. This is sophisticated, and if the Hartwell connection is true, it's also very personal. She's been planning this for years. What do you need from me? Be ready to move fast. I'm going to confront her this afternoon, and when I do, she's going to incriminate herself. At 2 o'clock, I walked into Victoria Hartwell's office unannounced. The reception area was expensively decorated, leather furniture, original artwork, fresh flowers that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries. I'm here to see Victoria Hartwell, I told the receptionist. Do you have an appointment? Tell her Evelyn Blackwood is here. She'll see me. Victoria appeared within 30 seconds, tall, elegant, with confident bearing that came from years of getting what she wanted. She was probably 50, with her father's sharp features. Mrs. Blackwood, what an unexpected pleasure. Miss Hartwell, I think we need to talk. Her office was even more impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and on the wall behind her desk, a photograph that made my breath catch. James Hartwell in his prime, standing in front of the courthouse, arms raised in victory after some long-ago legal triumph. Before he met me, I see you recognize my father. I remember him well. I'm sure you do. He certainly remembered you, right up until the day he died. She gestured. For me to sit, but I remained standing. Your father was a good attorney who made a bad choice. What you're doing to my family is criminal. What I'm doing is providing a service. Your son came to me worried about you. I simply offered to help by convincing him I was incompetent. Are you? You're 73, living alone in a house far too big for you. Your family has legitimate concerns about your safety, your finances, your future care. And the fact that my property is worth significantly more than you're offering? That's coincidence? Her smile was sharp, predatory. I have no idea what you mean. Of course you don't. Just like you have no idea that Dr. Sterling isn't actually a doctor, or that the assessment was fraudulent, or that you're taking 30% from Brookstone. Uncertainty flickered in her eyes. You can't prove any of that. Can't I? I pulled out a small digital recorder. Dr. Sterling was very talkative yesterday. You recorded a private conversation without consent. That's illegal. Texas is a one-party consent state, as any attorney should know. But then, you're not actually an attorney, are you? Her face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. I had Jonathan run a bar check this morning. Victoria Hartwell has never been licensed to practice law, which makes the documents you've been preparing another felony. She sat down hard. You have no idea what my father went through because of you. Your father lost a case because he built it on faulty evidence. I simply pointed that out. You destroyed him. He never recovered. His practice collapsed. His health failed. His reputation was ruined. He died broken and bitter, and it was all because of you. For the first time, I felt sympathy. I'm sorry for your father's pain. But Victoria, what happened wasn't my fault. And what you're doing won't bring him back. Maybe not. But it will give me the satisfaction of watching you lose everything that matters. Your house, your independence, your family's respect. Just like you took everything from him. The only thing I'm going to lose is my patience. I walked to her window, looking down at the street. In the distance, I could see the courthouse where I'd spent the best years of my professional life. Victoria, I want you to understand something clearly. I am not the confused old woman you thought you were targeting. I am Evelyn Blackwood, and I have never lost a case that mattered. I turned back to face her. This case matters. What are you saying? I'm saying that in approximately 10 minutes, investigators from the DA's office are going to arrive with a search warrant. They're going to seize your files, computers, financial records. They're going to find evidence of fraud, elder abuse, and practicing law without a license. Her face had gone completely white. You can't. I already have. You see, while you were planning your revenge, I was being someone you never bothered to research properly. I'm not just a retired attorney, Victoria. I'm a retired attorney with friends in very high places. As if on cue, there was commotion in the outer office. Voices, official commands, the sound of badges being displayed. That would be the cavalry. The last thing I saw was the look on her face as 3 investigators walked through her door. It was the same look her father had worn 25 years ago when he realized his case was falling apart. Justice was rarely dramatic, but it was always satisfying. Garrett was waiting in my driveway when I got home, pacing beside his truck. When he saw me get out of Jonathan's car, still wearing my courtroom suit, he stopped and stared. "Mom, what the hell is going on? Some investigator called asking about Victoria Hartwell and elder fraud. He said you filed the complaint." "Hello, Garrett. We need to talk." "Damn right we need to talk. What have you done?" I walked past him to my front door. I've reminded people that underestimating me is a dangerous mistake. Inside, I poured myself a glass of the good wine, the bottle Dale and I had been saving for a special occasion. "Mom, I don't understand. Victoria said she was helping us plan for your future. She said the assessment showed memory issues, that we needed to act fast to protect you." "Garrett, sit down." Something in my voice made him obey immediately. I'd never used my courtroom voice with my children before. "Your friend Victoria Hartwell is a fraud. The assessment was fake. The timeline was designed to pressure me, and the whole scheme was orchestrated to steal my property for a fraction of its value. That's impossible. She's a lawyer." "She's not a lawyer. She's a con artist whose father I defeated in court 25 years ago. This was revenge, Garrett. She used your concerns to manipulate you into betraying me." I watched the realization hit him. But she had documentation. All fake. Professional quality, but fake. Oh God. "Mom, I never meant. I was trying to help you." "Were you? Or were you trying to help yourself to an inheritance you thought you deserved?" The question hung between us like a blade. Garrett's face crumpled. "I thought you were struggling. I thought you needed help." "I know what you thought. The question is, why didn't you ask me instead of listening to strangers?" "Because—" He stopped, unable to finish. "Because you wanted it to be true. Because it was easier to believe I was helpless than to admit you'd been planning my life without consulting me." For the first time in 47 years, my son looked at me and saw someone he didn't recognize. "Who are you?" he whispered. I smiled. The same smile that had terrified opposing counsel for 15 years. "I'm your mother, but before that, I was someone else. Someone I think it's time you met properly." 3 weeks later, Victoria Hartwell was arrested and charged with multiple felonies. Brookstone Development withdrew their offer. And I kept my house, my independence, and my newly restored relationship with my son, who now calls every day and actually listens. Sometimes people ask if I regret hiding who I was for so many years. But I don't see it as hiding. I see it as choosing. For 47 years, I chose to be the woman my family needed. When they tried to take advantage of that choice, I simply chose to be someone else. After all, the most dangerous thing about underestimating someone isn't that you might be wrong. It's that they might decide to prove it.